Welcome, everyone. This is Kim Wilson from the Fletcher School at Tufts University. And today I'm going to talk a bit about the financial journeys of refugees, how they amass, store, carry, transfer, borrow, save, and spend on their journeys. We have preliminary findings from a study we did in Jordan, Turkey, Greece, and Denmark. Here was our method. Well, of course, we started with a literature review. And then we did some field work, and that field work consisted of 109 refugee research subjects who we approached voluntarily. This was not a randomized study. And they were located in countries of protracted displacement, such as Greece, Turkey, and Jordan, and one country of destination, Denmark. We did dozens of key informant interviews, and we did post-field study verification with Fletcher faculty and with experts in countries of origin, such as Afghanistan. We also supplemented our qualitative interviews, some of them anyway, with a journey map component. Inspired by the work of Robert Chambers, Elizabeth Wood, and Noel Bridgeton, journey maps allowed us to capture details of financial issues along each leg of a given route. So people would draw a leg of the route, and then they would talk about their financial pain points or financial transactions that they did. We conducted the interviews in squatters' camps. Here you see an example in Piraeus. In actual camps hosted by UNHCR or other agencies. In people's homes, this is somebody's home in Jordan. And along the streets, as well as in places of business. And this is an example. This is a Western Union in Jordan. Our key findings were that many of these journeys, if you're looking at the nature of the journey, were one-directional, long-haul journeys, what we called solid line journeys. An example would be from Afghanistan to Germany, or a city in Afghanistan to a city in Germany. And these were enjoyed by better off families. These were people that had the privilege of having a fairly continuous journey. There was also unidirectional long-haul journeys, but that were broken line. So they were moving in one direction, but the people would get stuck along the way. And that was experienced by less better off individuals and families. They would either get stuck for documentation reasons, or they ran out of money, or somebody got sick. There were multi-directional short-haul solid line journeys. For an example, Syria to Amman, Amman to Cairo, Cairo to Istanbul, and then maybe back to Amman. And these were experienced by students, professionals, often male, that were able to get visas. And they were going back and forth. And many of these were, in fact, Syrians or Iraqis. And then, of course, there was multi-directional, short-haul, broken line journeys. For example, Damascus to Istanbul, and they would get stuck in Cairo. And then they would return to Amman, and then they would wait, and they would return to Cairo. And these were students, professionals, often low-income workers, and families that were struggling to get from point A to point B. How vulnerable a person's journey is depends on the suddenness of departure, the borders crossed, their gender. And by the way, for borders crossed, I just want to point out, it's not just which borders, but how many, because the most dangerous part of any journey was border crossing. And naturally, for suddenness of departure, if the departure was very sudden and they didn't have time to plan, they often didn't have time to liquidate assets, which meant how they financed their journey was precarious. Whether they were male or female mattered. Sometimes men were more vulnerable than women in cases of sexual exploitation. If women were traveling with their families, sometimes they were less vulnerable, but women traveling alone were perhaps the most vulnerable of all. Whether people were single or in families, a coping strategy was that men that were traveling singly would often pair up with women who had children. So they would look as if they were in a family, and this was considered agreeable to border guards. Their country of origin mattered. There was a hierarchy. So for example, if you were from Syria, you were much more likely to get priority services when you were in Greece than if you were, say, from Afghanistan, or certainly from places like Algeria or Morocco. The quality of your documentation mattered very much. Did you have a proper passport or visa? And most people did not. I'm going to talk about that in a bit. And your options for reunification. Did you have family waiting for you in Germany? Many people did. They would have a son there that had traveled earlier with an uncle, or they had an older set of parents. And so, because many countries have reunification programs, you were in good shape if you had somebody that you were joining up with. Where your family is located along the route matters. Are they forward? Are they in Germany and they can send you remittances? Are they back in Afghanistan where they can help liquidate assets and send you money? The economic status of your family mattered very much because the more wealth you had, actually the better journey you were going to have because you could pay for it. The quality and quantity of assets that were sellable before your departure mattered, or the quality of those assets that could be managed by your family afterward mattered. Again, this was a sign of how liquid you could be, and could they divest those assets and send you funds along your route. And then what financial strategy you employed mattered very much in terms of how vulnerable you were in a journey. So here's some traveling strategies and realities. Smugglers are absolutely crucial. Everyone we spoke to had a smuggler. These are people that ranged from being guides to doing more than the work of a guide would. Some people experienced violence in the hands of smugglers, and others did not. But every single person we spoke to had a facilitator of some point during some leg of their journey, and usually multiple legs. Routes were shifting. And that was based on macro and local crackdowns on weather conditions, on the quality of the infrastructure. In big crossings, people often moved in groups of 30 or 50, and in smaller groups were also moving, 5 to 6, and they would then cluster in groups of 30 to 50. So often border crossings were very large, and that was because it had to make it worthwhile for the smuggler to get you across. But along a given leg of a journey internal to a country, it was usually much smaller groups. Identities were often shared, loaned, or faked. People were often robbed of their identities at border crossings. Guards, border patrol and guards would take them, and then they would have nothing, and they were exchanged for fake local documents. And those documents any document that was real became valuable. And so they were shared. So if you needed to withdraw money from a Western Union and you needed an identity, you could borrow one from a friend. And there were many forgeries. We learned that you could purchase fake documents anywhere from $40 to several $1,000s, depending on the quality of the document. Sometimes if they could get the passport to Germany to look just like the refugee, that was worth a higher price. Unidirectional deluxe strategies was the preferred option. So of course, if you had the ability, you could fly directly, and we heard many of these stories, not directly from the people, but if you could fly from Kabul to Germany with a fake passport on a plane, that was preferred. So in Afghanistan, our research revealed that people had in fact done this, and they would go via these circuitous routes, but they would get there within a few days. Most of the people we spoke to had been traveling for weeks and some months. The bulk of the cost of the financial journey, if you are a refugee or migrant, is for smuggling. So let's say, for example, this number was a very prominent number, $7,500 it costs you to go from Afghanistan to Greece. 6,000 of that will go to the smuggler, and that's, you can see documented here on one of our refugees' journey map. The rest people hide in cash, and some of the money remains behind, typically with family, for the family, or to be released later to the journeyer. Finance is a factor of wealth. So the poorer you are, and this is quite obvious, I'm saying something terribly obvious, but the poorer you are, your financial strategy is going to vary than for those who are wealthy. And it's also going to affect how disrupted or continuous your travel is. So if you're wealthier, you're more likely to use door-to-door smuggling services, what we called deluxe just a moment ago. You're more likely to use air travel because you're more likely to be able to pay not only for the plane tickets, but for the falsified documents. And you're more likely to use stepping stone strategies if you're poor. So you're moving from place to place along the route, often using different smuggling networks versus one clean, long smuggling network. If you're poor, your financial strategy is often to stop and gather. So you're borrowing and earning along the way. You're doing livelihoods such as domestic agriculture or construction work. And if you're very poor, you may stop to do sex work because that maybe is the only option open to you. If you're wealthier, you probably used an amass and deplete strategy. You saved up for your journey if you had time to plan, and you liquidated in advance so that you could finance a smuggler to take you on a unidirectional, unbroken route. And then you would deplete your assets across that journey. And if you were middle class, you were likely not to be able to afford door to door, but to afford a system, a guarantee system, which is somewhere between a stepping stone and a door to door system. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So this is a typical journey of people that we interviewed. Maybe they're starting here from Afghanistan. And you've, of course, heard about the crossings, the perilous crossings that from Turkey to Greece. There were other perilous parts of this route. This is the Zagros Mountains that lie between Iran and Turkey. And they're as high as 15,000 feet, and it can take up to 24 hours to cross, and often crossing in snow. So imagine if you're a 45, 60-year-old woman and you're having to cross with your children and grandchildren on foot. What a perilous part of that journey that is. And then this is a photo of refugees moving through Nimroz province in Afghanistan. And you can see they're flying out of the back of a truck that's rocketing through the province to the southern border of Afghanistan and into Pakistan. There would be financial pain points along this journey. The money exchange rates. You're going from Afghanis to dollars to start your journey, and then you're turning those dollars to rials in Iran, and you're turning them to Turkish lira in Turkey, and then to euros, depending on where you go. Afghanistan is it's not a dollarized country, but the dollar is very available there, and it's easier to procure than euros. And then, of course, another obvious financial pain point is loss or destruction. The money itself washes away as you're floating across between Greece and Turkey. This happened to a lot of people. They lost their funds. Or it's stolen. People would carry 2 phones and 2 wallets so they could give one to the thieves. They would wrap money around their waists of their children. They had special pockets that they could buy in the bazaar in Kabul that had hidden pockets for money. They stitched money into belts, into shoes, pretty much everything you can imagine. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that guarantee scheme that I hinted at before. So I've simplified the journey here. This is a journey that's going from Afghanistan to Iran, and the schematic will show you how the guarantee scheme works. So here's our starting point. We have a refugee, and she's starting in Kabul, let's say. The first thing she's going to do is try to find a kingpin smuggler. That's a smuggler that knows a lot of local smugglers. She may never meet him. In fact, she likely will never meet him. He may not even be located in Afghanistan, but she'll get the number from a trusted friend. She finds the smuggler, and she's been told that he's well connected, and so now she begins preparing for the financial part of her journey. And this is where she will find a saraf, or a local money trader. Some people call them hawaldars, in the marketplace. Again, she might find this person through a friend, and she will physically visit the hawaldar and say, I'd like to participate in the guarantee scheme. What she does is she triggers this by putting, let's say $7,500, since that's the number we were using before, into the hands of this money trader. It's a deposit. He texts the lead smuggler, because she's given him the number, and he says, she has deposited the money, I guarantee it, and it's here as she completes different legs of the trip. The lead smuggler then contacts his local smuggler who's in Kabul and says, all right, that's great. Local smuggler, take the refugee on the first leg of her trip, which she does. So she crosses into a place, let's say, into Zahedan or some place in Iran, and that's her first waypoint. She gets there safely. She texts and gives a code to her saraf in Kabul and says, "I made it safely. You can go ahead and pay the portion of this trip to the kingpin smuggler," which he does on her behalf. And then, of course, he has to settle up with his local smuggler, which he does either by a courier or, we heard this, through a bank or through another saraf. But he gets the money to his local smuggler. He then says to smuggler number 2, "You may take the refugee to her next waypoint." And she goes to the second waypoint, and similar transactions take place financially. And she makes her way through her journey in this manner. So this is the guarantee scheme. As you can see, each leg of the trip is guaranteed. And usually, in some cases, not usually, in some cases, the guarantee was for the full trip. So if you were going to Berlin, it was guaranteed no matter how many waypoints you went through that you would get to Berlin. And in that case, it was very expensive because the smuggler, if you didn't make it to the last legs of the trip, the smuggler would get paid nothing. So it was a full guarantee for the entire trip. But that wasn't the most common example of this guarantee scheme that we heard. So as you can see, it operates something between like a bond and a trust, a form of insurance. Let's look at findings from Syria, Turkey, and Jordan. We just looked at what we heard about from Afghanistan. And these are maybe the journeys that you're more familiar with hearing about in the news. The back and forth, the crossings across the ocean. And so in this, we're going to explore the joys and sorrows of kinship banking. And here's how kinship banking works. So here is our cast of characters. You have Uri, who's based in Turkey, and she's a refugee, and she left Syria. She left behind her sister Amira, who someday hopes to join her, but for now, Amira's still in Syria. We have Raja, who's also in Turkey, and her brother Adnan, who's also back in Syria. And then we have Adnan's uncle, who's in Syria as well. So this is a schematic of a transaction that happened all the time, and we're going to talk about that. So Uri texts her sister Amira to give 10 euros to Uri's friend Adnan in Syria. And Amira says, "Fine, I'll do that. I'm happy to." And she physically finds Adnan and she gives him the 10 euros. Adnan texts his sister Raja to give Uri 40 euros. And Raja says, "Fine, I'll do so." Because Adnan has heard that Uri really needs the funds. She's got a kid and she's hard up. Adnan's uncle also has heard about this and asks Raja to give Uri 10 on his behalf, and Raja does so. So Raja is now out 50 euros and Amira is out 10. Adnan's uncle then settles up. He travels to Turkey and he pays Raja 50 euros, 40 euros on behalf of his debt, Adnan's debt, and 10 on his own. So this is after just a few transactions. Who owes what to whom? Uri owes 60, 40 to Adnan, 10 to Adnan's uncle, and 10 to Amira. The downside of this is all of these family kinds of lending happen with mental bookkeeping and through memories. And so a lot of people reported that this family lending, they did not call it that. They called it just payments. Many people were adamant to say, no, we never borrow, we never lend. That's not our culture. But in fact, you can see that there's a lot of lending going on. So the downside is there were lots of conflicts would ensue. The upside was that it's a familiar form of finance and no one thinks they're lending. Financial realities and strategies. Well, the big pain point were these exchanges, and I think we have a couple of quotes here. We had many Syrians asking to exchange. This is in Jordan. Turkey. We had many Syrians asking to exchange Syrian liras, but they were shocked with what their money was worth in Turkish liras. I do remember that one guy thought that we were joking with him. At one point, we considered stopping the exchange for the Syrian lira because it's so unstable, he said. And we did stop it for a while. But now we're hesitant to deal with the Syrian lira. And anyway, we don't get many clients with this request. People are actually trying to put money into dollars before they even try to exchange in local currencies. This was a huge pain point, though. And our research team found that in the back of the official remittance office, that there were informal hawala activities going on as well. So you could have formal and informal side by side. So what are the implications for future study, for policy making, and for design interventions? We just have three. First, for designing interventions, familiarity rules. You're asking people who are living in uncertain conditions to do certain things, and naturally they're going to want to do what is most familiar with them. It's not necessarily the best time to try a new gadget or a new platform. They're used to working in cash. They're used to the hawala system. So one needs to carefully think about how much you're going to disrupt what is familiar with a new product or service. The second implication is that refugee routes are identical to routes of illicit goods, that migration is a system. So the poppy that's being shipped from Afghanistan to Europe is happening through the exact same routes that refugees are traveling. And that might make it difficult for policymakers to swallow. How much can you really service smugglers along those routes, knowing that they're smuggling more things than people? And there's the issue in terms of know your customer and customer due diligence in the financial inclusion world of these elastic identities, that they change, they can be bought. So we have to ask ourselves, is KYC really working? Is there a better way to do it, better for the refugee and better for the people that really need to know who's doing what with their money? So we want to thank our supporters, and I want to thank you for listening.